Good morning and welcome to 365 Days of Amazing Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are on day 133, multiple of 7, week 19, and I'm going to continue with my life as a steward. Last week I had talked about bees and Keith Rhodes, and fascinating. Today I need to be going out to work on my bees or with my bees a little bit more. I split some hives last Friday, and so now I'm to the point I need to, or actually 2 weeks ago, and now I need to go check and make sure that the hives that I split have queens, and the new hives have queens as well. Otherwise, I'm going to go online somewhere and order some queens. It's so amazing. You can go online these days and order just about anything, including queen bees. And the queen bees to order, of course, are going to be mite resistant bees that do a good job of removing the mites from each other. Now, I think I'd mentioned that Keith had grown up Mennonite horse and buggy farmer in Pennsylvania. He'd left that community, as did his sister Vera, and somewhere along the line or along the way, Keith got into transcendental meditation, which is where I met him. His family that lived in this community in Pennsylvania, they moved to a new community in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And so I don't know exactly how they do this or decide how to do it, but a bunch of families will move. So there's a community and they start to buy land in a certain vicinity. And hopefully they're able to buy land that adjoins one another's, because again, it builds more of a sense of community. How they picked this area in Bowling Green, Kentucky, I do not know. But there had to have been at least 30 families. And there were dirt roads that joined many of these properties, these farms. And they had a church, of course, which they would meet in on Sundays. The first time we went down, it was Thanksgiving. Not that they celebrate Thanksgiving, but it was during that time. So it was in the fall, November, and it was pretty cold. The house that Keith's father and mother and his younger brother and sister lived in was only heated by wood, and that by only a cook stove that was a wood-burning cook stove. So that was in the kitchen. So the heat got around to some of the rooms, but not well, and the house, I don't think it was insulated. So the time that the house was warming was when cooking was going on, which was morning, noontime, and dinner time. So that fire was going most of the day. Where I slept the first time I went down there was a room that, well, the entrance of it was outside. So there was no heat coming in from the wood stove at all. And it was so cold. It was below freezing out there. You know, I'm in a bed. I went to bed with all my clothes on and a hat on my head and a lot of covers, and it was hard to stay warm, I have to say. During the daytime, because Keith was visiting, we would go and visit his brothers and sisters. I can't remember exactly. There were 11 children in all in that family. It could have been 13. I think it was 11. And so all of the members of that family were in the community. And Marlon and Dinah were the youngest, and they were still living at home. Marlon at that point was, I don't know, 24 or 5. I was in my 20s as well at that point. And we got on pretty well. He called me his younger brother because I didn't know how to do anything. They do everything by hand or with horsepower. So there's no machinery, there's no electricity to gain advantage with. And it was amazing the amount of things that could be accomplished just through handwork. When a big project was going on, other men from throughout the community would come and help out. For instance, there was one day when we were pouring concrete in a milk barn. And I should tell you, okay, there was the first trip that I took down with Keith, which was a lot of visiting, a lot of driving around in buggies being pulled by one horse, which was frigidly cold as well. Some walking around between houses, but not a whole lot of work. Keith's family, I looked like I could be in the family. They were originally from, some area in Switzerland as well. And so, I don't know. I got there, and if I had had a good beard on, I would have blended right in with his family members. I got along with them quite well, and they invited me to come anytime I wanted to come. Shortly after that trip that we had together, maybe it was fairly soon after that. I ended up moving to back to Ohio. So I was pretty close to Bowling Green, and I began to make regular trips down there. I took 2 milk cows that I'd picked up from somebody in Indiana and transported them down to families in the community. And anyway, I would go down there and work and help out. And it was fascinating because, again, the way of approaching work without machines, gas-powered machines or electrically powered machines, was really interesting. The community effort that would go into doing projects was amazing. So, as I was saying, we were going to pour some concrete in a milk barn. And so I went over with Marlon one morning, and by the time we got there, there were already at least 20 men there. And the concrete mixers were just started, and these were being powered by horsepower. So there was, they had a number of ways to generate horsepower. One was to have a number of horses basically on a carousel, and they would be walking around in a circle, and that center pivot point would have some kind of a belt that traveled underneath the ground or above ground over to another mechanical point that would then allow it to turn, and from there they would take that power and run things. So they were running one big concrete mixer on one of these contraptions, and there were a number of the younger men, which I was considered a younger man, who were lined up with wheelbarrows to transport the poured concrete or the mixed concrete along little narrow boards. They seemed narrow to me, to where the concrete needed to go. Now, when we got to where the concrete was, where we were dumping it in, rebar had been placed, in the area so that it would have structural integrity. The rebar was kept off the ground a little bit so it would end up in the middle of the concrete. Some people use cement and concrete synonymously, and you should know that concrete is the mixture of cement, gravel, and sand typically, or whatever kind of stone you're going to be using in the concrete mix. Cement, Portland cement, as it is typically known, comes from baking lime. And once you've baked lime, it turns into cement, which you can then use to mix a mixture that will harden. So we're pouring concrete, and I'm lined up with wheelbarrow, and I'm the third one who's going to be wheeling concrete down these boards. And they were probably 2x12s that had been laid out in a line. So you had to go from one 2x4 to another. And there's not a lot of room for your feet. It's plenty of room for the wheelbarrow's tire, so long as you keep it, well, on the board. Now, I can't even remember if they used pneumatic tires. They may have not, just to eliminate one more potential problem, having to fix a tube. I think the wheelbarrows all had steel wheels. So I get to the mixer, they fill me up, and they really filled me. I don't know if they did it on purpose to see if I could make it down or not. But I lifted the handles. I wasn't very good with a wheelbarrow, and I prayed that I would make it down to the end of the boards without embarrassing myself. And as I'm wheeling my wheelbarrow in, another guy was wheeling his wheelbarrow out. I can't remember his name right now. Maybe Tommy, I think it was. And he sees me coming his way, and he kind of gets out of the way. And I'm sure he saw a strain on my face because I was so worried I was going to dump that stuff before I got to where it needed to go. And he said, "Theo, do you want me to get that? Do you need help?" And there was no way I was going to ask for help. I said, "No, I've got this." And I barely made it to the end of those boards where the older men were waiting to help lift the wheelbarrow up so it could be dumped and the concrete put into place. But I got there and successfully deposited my load of concrete, turned around, and for the rest of the day as I was moving concrete, the men who were filling the wheelbarrows never filled it as full as that again. Thank goodness. But just moving a wheelbarrow, you think, okay, that's no problem. That's easy. But until you really start doing it, and you start doing it with like a liquid load that can shift from side to side, you do not know what wheelbarrowing something heavy is about. And this went for all kinds of manual tasks. I know I talked about Keith showing me how to dig a hole in the ground and how to spiral with the shovel down and down and down into the earth so that you were moving the earth out of the way as you continued to make progress, big spiral. The wisdom in that community of how to do things by hand it was phenomenal. And I'm sure it still is. Everything done by hand. The amount we could accomplish, it was just impressive, surprising. I'm running out of time. I'm going to have to continue stories about my time in the Mennonite community because it had a huge impact on my sense of being able to accomplish things in difficult situations, and just learned so much about working in community as well. Okay, hope you have a good rest of your day, and thanks for joining.